Hi everyone, nice to see you all here again this week. Just bear with me for a moment whilst I get set up. While I'm doing that, why don't everyone tell me how you're doing and what you've been up to in the last 2 weeks? 2 weeks, yeah. Okay, let's see, what am I doing here? Okay, yeah, so whilst we're waiting for a few more people to join us, do let me know what you've been up to in the last 2 weeks and how things have been going. So sorry I had to cancel last week's sharing. I came down with a bout of food poisoning after I got back from Kechara Soup Kitchen on Saturday night around 1 in the morning or something. I think I must have eaten something funny, but that resulted in me waking up on Sunday feeling like, I don't know, like my organs wanted to come out of my body or something. It was horrible. So yeah, had a bout of food poisoning all of Sunday, and then I got food poisoning again on Tuesday, which was not fun. So yeah, that was me last week, food poisoning all week. And then on Thursday, we had the Seven Rinpoche mantra retreat. So a group of staff and residents of Kechara Forest Retreat got together, and then we did 3 days, so 8 sessions in total of focusing on recitations of Rinpoche's name mantra, Oma Guru Kiri Daza Shasana Dara Virya Siri Hong Hong, and focusing not so much on the accumulation of the mantra recitations, but more on the visualization. And there is actually a post. Morning Esther, good morning Wei Ting. So there's actually a post on Rinpoche's blog on samrinpoche.com, which teaches people how to do the Guru Yoga of Sam Rinpoche, as well as engage in a retreat focusing on the visualizations and on the accumulation of the mantra, and explains also the benefits of engaging in this practice. So that post was published last week, and people can engage in the retreat for themselves at home, since we're not able to do it here in KFR for the public at the moment, considering that we are still in the CMCO phase of things. I say we, but it's really Klang Valley, Selangor and Putrajaya. But anyway, yeah, so that took place, and in between the breaks in the retreat sessions, we did mantra rolling, and we offered candles, and did other practices and our personal practices in between. So it was really, really good. 3 days just solely focusing on visualizing and connecting with Rinpoche and strengthening our connection with Rinpoche. Morning, Hannah. All right, so then as soon as the retreat was over, then I went down to KSK, Kechara Soup Kitchen last night, and picked up 17 tubs of butter cookies, which KSK is currently selling as part of the empowerment project for, I believe it's single mothers. So you can find more information on their Facebook page, but they are currently selling homemade butter cookies made by single mothers, single parents, as part of the empowerment project. So all proceeds of the sale of these butter cookies go to the participants of the empowerment project. All right, so I picked up 17 tubs, 5 of which are for Sharon, not for me, and then the others are mine, which I'm gifting away because I can't eat them because butter cookies. All right, so yeah. Morning, Jillian. Okay, and then, yeah, so we're still in the CMCO. We've got another 8 days to go. Please stay at home so that the CMCO can be lifted. I'm sure everybody wants the CMCO to be lifted, right? And if you're not able to come to KFR at the moment because you are actually located within the states that are where interstate, interdistrict travel is banned, you can still participate for the Sam Rinpoche Relic Stupa project in TTDI in KL. You just need to contact Louise, and you can volunteer with mantra rolling especially. Like I said, sign up sooner rather than later. Why? It simply means that the earlier you sign up to volunteer, it means the more mantras you can roll, which means that by the time we actually get to filling the stupa, you will have rolled many more mantras to put into the stupa, okay? As opposed to like signing up at the last minute and then like rushing and then realizing that instead of, rolling, 500 mantras that could have gone into the stupa, you only were able to roll 15, all right? So sign up and contact Louise for that. All right, so before we get started for today, that's me jabbering on for today, that's enough already. Before we get started on today's sharing, I'm going to do a quick prayer to ascribe the lineage and the source of the information and knowledge that's going to be shared today, as usual. I go for refuge in my Lama, from whom I've received these teachings. I go for refuge in the lineage Lamas, from whom my Lamas received these teachings. All right, thank you very much for joining me today. If this is your first time here, I don't know if it's your first time here, but hello, my name is Pastor Jinai. I'm a pastor based in Kechara House in Malaysia, which you probably will have guessed given that... Oh, morning Debbie, hello. Which you probably have guessed since you're on the Kechara Facebook fan page, but yes, my name is Pastor Jinai. All right, and so yeah, just a quick recap because it's been many weeks since I've seen you guys. 3 weeks ago, I went through the first part on judgment. So that was 3 weeks ago when I talked about where judgment arises from, what judgment is and how judgment is different from discernment, and why it is not helpful to have an attitude of judging. Then after that, the week after that, I did part 2. We went through part 2 on the sharing on judgment and talked about some of the tools that Rinpoche had previously shared with us for how we can reduce judgments and judging. So just a quick recap, since it's been a couple of weeks since we've all been together. Excuse me. Hi Sukpan, hi Linman, hey Joyce. So yeah, it's been a couple of weeks since we've been together, so I'm going to go quickly through, do a quick recap on what we talked about 2 weeks ago on how we can reduce judgment. So one of the first tools that Rinpoche shared with us was to just take a breath and to reframe our language and to give ourselves an opportunity to change our reaction from one of judgment to discernment. Then another tool that Rinpoche shared with us was to meditate on ourselves and to ask ourselves questions like, well, do I annoy people? Do I irritate people? Do I anger people? And when I'm judged for those things, how do I feel? And so, since I don't like being judged for those things, how will other people feel when I'm judging them for these attitudes which I perceive to be difficult or I perceive to be annoying, and so on. Then another tool that Rinpoche had shared with us was to meditate on impermanence. So what we like and what we dislike, and our projections of these preferences onto other people, our preferences and our likes and dislikes are impermanent. And the things that we find satisfactory or unsatisfactory or dissatisfactory about a situation or about a person is also permanent. These things change as we grow, as we experience more, as we learn more, as we gain more knowledge. So what we like and what we don't like changes in time. I mean, you can meditate on it for yourself. The things that you liked eating as a child or disliked eating as a child rather totally changed as you get older. Some people detest vegetables when they're young, but when they get older, they become vegetarian. All right, so we can see in ourselves many examples of how our likes and dislikes and our preferences and what we enjoy or find pleasurable and what we find unpleasurable changes as we get older. So since our likes and dislikes are impermanent, and why are we passing judgment on a situation or an event which is also impermanent? All right, other tools that Rinpoche had previously shared with us in how we can reduce judgment or the act of judging is to meditate on equanimity. So that is actually... Good morning Iman. So equanimity is walking this fine line between what we're attracted to and what we are averse to, what we like and what we don't like, what we praise or what we blame, what we praise or what we criticize, and we do this without attaching ourselves to one side or the other. So when we maintain equanimity, it gives us an opportunity to practice discernment, which is offering feedback that is objective and that is based on, that's action focused. So we give feedback based on somebody's action as opposed to somebody's like so-called inherent being. So the example that I gave 3 weeks ago, to define or help to distinguish between judgment and discernment is, again, judgment being like a judge sitting in court and giving a final verdict or final pronouncement on someone being good or bad. But discernment being a piano teacher or music teacher, observing a student and then offering feedback on how the student can improve or upgrade their skills. So in the case of the piano teacher or in the case of the music teacher, they are offering feedback on the improvement of skills as opposed to on the person. So when we maintain equanimity, it gives us an opportunity to offer that kind of feedback which is objective and which is action focused. And then finally, Rinpoche also shared with us that in order for us to reduce judgment or to start to reduce judgment, it's very good for us to generate compassion. So we often hear that compassion as an attitude has very, very wide, very broad benefits. And commonly in the media, it's got quite a reductionist, narrow approach to compassion. It's, said very lightly, but when we meditate on compassion and we generate compassion, we think about compassion, it has very, very broad, wide range of benefits. One being that it can help us to reduce judgment. Why? Because when you are compassionate, compassion or abiding in compassion is abiding in a state that's free from judgment and free from agenda. When you act out of compassion, you're acting purely out of somebody else's interest or somebody else's welfare, or someone else's benefit, and it's free from any kind of agenda that you may have, agenda for personal gain, agenda for personal promotion, agenda for personal benefit. So when you act out of compassion, you're acting out of a freedom from your personal feelings or your personal preferences or your relationship to somebody else. You're acting purely out of the wish to benefit someone else. All right. So when you try and generate compassion, when you try and act out of compassion, you're thinking, how can I help this person? Which means, how can my thought help this person? How can my feedback help this person? How can my behavior help this person? How can my approach help this person? And then you try and hold that thought regardless of how you feel about the other person or what the other person has done to you or what the other person can do for you. So when you do this over and over again, and when you try to generate this thought over and over again, until it becomes your automatic reaction, it starts to replace judgment, because you cannot abide in a state of compassion at the same time as abiding in a state of judgment. Why? Because compassion is a state free from judgment. All right. So that is my very short, quick recap for what was shared. So, excuse me, just quickly checking on the time on what has been shared 2 weeks ago and 3 weeks ago on judgment. All right. So before I go into today's topic, I would just like to thank the sponsors of today's talk, who are, well, the first one's anonymous, and who wishes to dedicate their contribution to the following. May obstacles be cleared so that His Eminence, the 25th Stem Rinpoche students, can swiftly find the incarnation. The second sponsor of today's sharing is Lini, who offered their contribution without dedication. Thank you, Lini. And the third sponsor of today's sharing is Stacy Isidro, who would like to dedicate her contribution to the following. I dedicate virtues to great enlightenment for all sentient beings. So thank you very much, all of you, for supporting these sharings, not just mine, but also that of the other pastors and that of the other speakers and facilitators online. If you guys would like to sponsor a talk, if you would like to contribute to a talk, there is a link in the description section of this video. So do click on it, because your contribution does help us to continue making these online programs available to everyone, which is especially relevant given that globally we all now seem to be moving back into a state of lockdown. I just heard that, well, when I woke up, I read that the UK is going back into lockdown next week, Wednesday or Thursday, and it's nationwide this time. And like the number of cases in the States are like on the rise, and it's all because winter is coming. So yeah, given that many people are now not able to get to their centers, are not able to visit their teachers and so on, online programs really do need your support and really are continuing to help to keep the wheel of Dharma turning. All right. So thank you guys so much for your contributions and for your support. Okay, so this week I'm going to talk about something that can be linked to judgment, and that is the topic of idle chatter. And this topic was actually a special request. All right, so again, if you guys have any special requests for topics to be covered, do let me know. I may not cover it exactly in the next video or exactly in the next session, but I will get to it eventually, all right? But let me know if you guys have any topics or any questions that you would like covered in these sharings. So, what is idle chatter? And I know that this is something that we might be finding ourselves doing quite a lot during this COVID lockdown time, because we can't go out, we might not have much to do, we may be looking for ways to entertain ourselves, struggling with boredom. Good morning, Sally. Struggling with boredom. We are with the same people day in, day out. And we are finding that we are running out of things to talk about. So we're starting to talk about things without much direction, or just to fill the airspace. But idle chatter is something that all of us have engaged in one time or another, and maybe engaging in more and more as lockdowns and movement restrictions continue. So what is idle chatter? Idle chatter are words that are spoken with no purposeful intent at all. So it's words or speech that is pointless, words or speech that lack purpose or lack depth, words or speech that communicates nothing of value, and words or speech that only stirs up defilements, delusions in our own minds and in other people's minds. So idle chatter is so important that it's one of the 10 refuge vows that all of us take when we take refuge, and we basically go through the formal refuge process, formal refuge ceremony, and we kind of confirm ourselves to be Buddhist. All right, so it's one of the 10 basic vows that everybody has to take before they can even take on any other vows, right? And there are many ways that idle chatter can manifest. So you may be thinking, because idle chatter is, or are words or speech that is purposeless, or lacks depth, or lacks intent, or lacks any point, or doesn't communicate anything of value, we might automatically be inclined to think that idle chatter is gossip. But idle chatter is not necessarily just gossip. Idle chatter can also be uttering, verbalizing anything that comes to our head, and saying it without any thought or saying it without any intent. So just running our mouth. Idle chatter can be sitting around and just talking, just to fill the silence, which often happens for many people. Idle chatter can also be saying anything without any sense of responsibility. So just saying things without caring about the consequence or the result that it has. Idle chatter can even be non-verbal, so it doesn't have to be verbal. It can be typing or texting things purely for entertainment's sake, for no real purpose at all. It can be consuming content mindlessly, just so that we can regurgitate it later to seem more interesting, to fill the silence, to have something to talk about, to have something to discuss with other people. Idle chatter is basically any speech or any words that don't directly further our goal of gaining enlightenment. All right, so it can be anything. The most common examples that Rinpoche gave about idle chatter was mindlessly, continuously talking about, let's say, discussing politics, or gossiping, talking or looking for entertainment, or even philosophical discussions. So we might think that philosophical discussions do not fall under the header of idle chatter, but I'll explain why it can happen to be that way. All right. So all of these topics, Rinpoche did share before that all of these topics, depending on our intent, can become idle chatter. When we don't have the intent to benefit somebody with them, then it becomes a distraction, it becomes a waste of time. So, for example, why politics? Creates division, it creates disharmony, creates a sense of winners and losers, creates or generates or increases people's feelings of anger, increases people's feelings of revenge, and so on. All right, and it's all based on divisions, and it's all based on lines and thought that is completely man-made. All right, so because it doesn't serve the greater goal of enlightenment, therefore it can fall under the banner of idle chatter. Should we be engaging it without purpose or intent? Gossip. Why does gossip fall under the, or could fall under the banner of, idle chatter? Because gossip can create disharmony. Gossip can create schism. Gossip can create ill feeling. Gossip can create negative thoughts, and gossip can create doubt. And gossip, as a form of idle chatter, has so much power that there are even pujas that specifically address the consequences related to too much gossip. So there is a specific puja called Miga Tramdo in Tibetan, and it's also known as the gossip cutting puja. And the reason why Miga Tramdo as a puja exists is because speech has energy. Why does speech have energy? Well, if you have positive and beneficial speech, for example, mantras, for example, Dharma teachings, Dharma books, Dharma sharings, and so on. If such speech has positive energy or has positive results, therefore it also stands to reason that the opposite also exists, which is that there's speech with negative results and negative consequences. So if speech like mantras can bless animals, then the opposite of what a mantra is can also have negative results. And so since speech has energy, negative speech also has energy, and it has a potential to build up and to develop such that it can create obstacles for the object of the speech. So Miga Tramdo is a specific puja that exists to counter negative energy and to counter obstacles that arise as a result of an overabundance of negative speech. So if like a group of people are constantly talking negatively about you, it can create obstacles for you. All right, so gossip can create disharmony, it can create schism, it can create ill intent, can create ill feeling. All right, why entertainment? Why is entertainment considered a distraction or waste of time? Right, because it reinforces our constant need to feel alive. Morning, Ainin. It reinforces our attachment, and it reinforces our need to consume mindlessly. So just think and just observe the environment around us, and just observe how we are constantly talking about food, and constantly talking about sales, the latest sales. We're constantly talking about shopping and buying the latest branded goods. We're constantly talking about celebrities and discussing their lives and discussing, who's going out with who broke up with who's in love with who cheated on who, what is this outrageously expensive thing that they bought, and so on. All right, so all of these things, if you think about it, these conversations are a distraction and a waste of time because they don't further our goal of enlightenment. And also because they also reinforce our attachments. Because the more we talk about this, the more we discuss it, the more we bring it to the forefront of our minds, we're constantly reinforcing in ourselves that, hey, actually these things are desirable. Actually these things are what I want. I do want to be like that celebrity who's gone off to Mykonos or wherever on their umpteenth holiday of the year, and I want to work really, really, really hard so that I have the financial capacity to be able to do that. All right, so all of these things, all these conversations do reinforce our attachments, and they don't add to our practice towards enlightenment. Now, why can philosophical discussions, I can't pronounce the word properly, why can philosophical discussions be considered a distraction or waste of time? Because you might be thinking, well, since I'm discussing something that's of depth, surely it cannot be considered idle chatter. And the thing is, Rinpoche has previously explained that philosophical discussions can actually be considered idle chatter. Why? Because when we engage in philosophical discussions, we need to be mindful of our intent for doing so. So are we engaging in a philosophical discussion? Someone needs to find a shorter word for that. Are we engaging in a philosophical discussion because we want to learn, or because we want to look good? Are we engaging in debating because we want to get new knowledge, or because we want people to admire our intellect and we want to show off and show to people how sharp our brains are and how much we can retain, or how we can see things from different perspectives and how brilliant we are. All right. So why is it when we're in a philosophical discussion, when we're debating philosophy or debating anything of depth, anything complex, we need to be mindful, why are we engaged in that discussion? Why are we engaged in a debate? Are we engaged in the debate because we genuinely want to understand something and we genuinely want to learn about the other person's point of view, or we genuinely want to learn something new? Or are we engaged in it because we want the other person to admire our intellect, or we want observers to admire our intellect and we want to look good? So what is the point? Rinpoche said, what is the point of us talking and talking and talking and never putting something into practice? When we are so keen to show off to everyone how much we know, and we would like to show off to them through the medium of discussion, that medium of discussion, becomes an exercise in showing off, which is, look at me, look at my ability to process complex information, look at me, I know so much more than others, look at me, I'm so much smarter than them, look at me, I can memorize so many more things than them, and so on. All right. So what Rinpoche explained was that when we don't have results through our practice, it doesn't matter how much we can discuss, doesn't matter how much we can regurgitate, doesn't matter how much we can retain. When we don't have results through our practice, whatever it is that we want to discuss, whatever it is we want to debate, whatever it is that we want to regurgitate and so on, ends up becoming purposeless discussion anyway. And hence, in that way, it becomes idle chatter. So there is a difference between scholar and between practitioner and between an attained practitioner. Some attained practitioners don't necessarily have to be scholars. For example, the tale that all of us are familiar with, that student of Shakyamuni Buddhas who was totally unable to remember anything. The second Buddha taught him one word, he would forget that one word when he got to the second word, and he was completely unable to retain anything. So you could say that that person was, with respect, not the brightest and very dull. Instead of judging him for it, Shakyamuni compassionately taught a way to him in order for him to gain attainments. How? Shakyamuni gave him a broom and told him to sweep. And as he's sweeping, just recite Dupong, Drimapong, Dupong, Drimapong, Dupong, Drimapong, and constantly recite and meditate on that. It was very difficult for him at first. When he memorized the word do, he forgot. After he had memorized do, when he got to pong, he would forget do. So it took him a lot of effort just to remember Dupong, Drimapong, Dupong, Drimapong. But he finally got it, and he meditated on it, and he did it, and he followed his teacher's instructions, and he became attained. So what does that show? It shows that you don't necessarily have to have the strongest, the highest, the fastest intellect in order to gain attainments. All right. So when you do engage in deep philosophical discussion, be mindful. Are we doing it because we want to learn, or are we doing it because we want to look good? And so if we are doing it because we want to look good and we are not showing any results through our practice, then that discussion ends up becoming pointless, purposeless discussion anyway, putting it therefore under the banner of idle chatter. All right. So what does it mean? Does it mean that every single discussion and every single conversation we have has to be something that's so serious and so deep and so purposeful? At our level, at our stage, it's not easy. So I'm going to say no for now. All right. For example, Rinpoche would often appear to be just humoring us when we were talking nonsense. Let's say during Chinese New Year, for example, okay, when everyone else goes off to their family reunions and so on, a small group of us every year would be with Rinpoche. Maybe 4 or 5 of us would be with Rinpoche, and would have our own little reunion dinner. And during this reunion dinner, we didn't necessarily talk about, very outwardly Dharma topics. We would discuss complete nonsense sometimes. Of course, invariably, inevitably, towards the end of the conversation, Rinpoche would pivot and direct the conversation and steer into a more Dharma topic. But in that first hour, the first 1.5 hours and so on, Rinpoche would appear to be humouring us when we're discussing complete nonsense. And that is our level, all right? That is the level for many of us. So it doesn't mean that every single topic, every single conversation we have has to be serious and has to be deep and has to be meaningful and has to be full of purpose and so on. And if it's not, oh my God, I feel so bad. Oh my God, I engaged in idle chatter for today and so on. Idle chatter or, conversations that don't appear to have deep meaning or deep purpose and so on does have its time and place. For example, if we work with people and, water cooler chat, water cooler talk, can help to foster a more friendly environment or can help to foster a sense of camaraderie with our colleagues. And so in those instances, it may be helpful to engage in a little bit of chit-chat, and a bit of conversation around the water cooler. It may be beneficial for us to go out for lunch with our colleagues sometimes. That kind of stuff is okay. So as long as we are aware of what we're doing and why we're doing it. However, it can quickly devolve into that being our habit. So every time we go out for lunch, every time we go out for dinner, we have to bring somebody along because we have to talk to them. Or the second we get a break in our work, we quickly run to the pantry so that we can gossip with somebody in the office, all right? Hey, did you see what that person did over the weekend? And so on. It can quickly devolve. So we need to be mindful when we're doing it and be aware of when it starts to basically degenerate into a habit, which I talked about in previous weeks. Just as we are able to develop positive habits, just as we are able to develop virtuous habits, we are also in a position to reinforce our non-virtuous negative habits, all right, our destructive habits. So we need to be mindful when we are engaging in that type of behavior. So when we're doing that, be aware that we may be putting ourselves in a position where we are building a habit or reinforcing a habit that we don't need. We're trying to reduce the habit, not increase it, all right? So although idle chatter, morning JP, hello. So although idle chatter is not so severe in negativity, if we engage in it too much, it wastes our time and it can end up becoming an obstacle to our Dharma practice. So that is why it's advisable for us not to engage in idle chatter. So since it's advisable for us not to engage in idle chatter, how can we reduce it? One of the first things that Rinpoche shared with us was that we need to be aware of how our speech reflects our mind. So meditate on what triggers you have and why it is we engage in idle chatter. What triggers us to engage in idle chatter? So you guys know that proverb, adverb, that saying, great minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, and simple minds discuss people. All right, so meditate on why and what triggers you to engage in idle chatter. Do we engage in idle chatter because we're trying to fill the silence? In general, we are trained to think that if we meet someone and we don't talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and fill the airspace with conversation, we might upset that person and make that person think that we're bored of them or we're not interested in them. Do we engage in idle chatter because we are attempting to fend off how nervous we are in a situation? So some people, when they find themselves in an unusual or strange situation with people that they don't know or people that they're unfamiliar with, they just talk and they're like a machine gun and everything conceivable under the sun comes out of their mouth. Why? Because they're very, very nervous. So do we engage in idle chatter because we're trying to fend off nervousness? Do we engage in idle chatter because we're trying to impress people? So for example, philosophical discussion to show off how much we know and how good we are and how smart we are? Do we engage in idle chatter because we're trying to keep the subject of a conversation focused on ourselves? And don't you know people like that, right? Aren't there people you are familiar with or that you are aware of when you try and have a conversation with them about something, somehow they manage to turn it back on themselves. So if you're in the middle, for example, if you're in the middle of explaining a problem to them, they manage to switch it around and be like, well, back in the day, I experienced, or hey, I had a similar experience, or hey, I saw this, and so on, all right, as you're trying to explain something to them. So examine our minds and examine what it is that triggers why we engage in idle chatter. Idle chatter is a sign of mental agitation. So it's a sign of a mind that's easily distracted, a sign of a mind that's not within our control yet, and a sign of a mind that has a constant need to be entertained. Idle chatter is also potentially a sign of our insecurity. So we are so uncomfortable with our neutral self, sitting in silence on our own, that we need something to fill the air. Idle chatter could also be a sign of a very deep-rooted sense of self-centeredness, where we are somehow able to tai chi, manipulate, or move about a conversation, and we manage to make it about us. Then when we have engaged in this type of meditation and we have identified what it is that triggers us to engage in idle chatter, or the situations that trigger us to engage in such action, then we can address it. How? If idle chatter is speech without purpose, or speech without intent, or speech without meaning, we counter it with activities that are purposeful, right? So for example, if the reason why we engage in idle chatter is because of mental agitation, so we're always bored, then look for something that will occupy our mind that's virtuous. So if we're constantly in need of being if we're constantly in need of being entertained, constantly looking for something to entertain us, occupy our mind instead with something that's virtuous, something that's beneficial. For example, retreats. For example, volunteering in your Dharma center. For example, charity work, social work. Basically doing anything that compels us or directs us to focus out on something else other than ourselves, to focus out on others. If our idle chatter if we engage in idle chatter because of insecurity, how do we counter that? How do we counter that we are uncomfortable with ourself, our neutral self? Engage in meditation. Practice sitting with ourselves and getting comfortable with that. Or mantra recitation. So Rinpoche would sometimes suggest this to people. So for people who speech is generally occupied constantly, we're trying to fill the air, or constantly trying to fend off nervousness or insecurity, Rinpoche would sometimes suggest to people to recite mantras instead. Why? Because when your mouth is preoccupied or engaged in the act of reciting mantras, you're unable to use your speech for other things. And this is something that I saw was so wonderful, so wonderful to observe when I went to Canada a few years ago, and it was for the opening of Venerable Zao Rinpoche's Dharma Center. And in between events, in the breaks, there was a Geshe-la that I always saw sitting quietly inside the Gompa. When other people, the rest of us were outside, and the rest of us were joking and laughing and engaging idle chatter, entertaining ourselves. There were a few times I went in to use the bathroom, and when I went in to use the bathroom, I saw Geshe-la, one of the Geshe-las, sitting quietly in the Gompa and doing some kind of practice. He would either be doing prayers, or he'd be doing prostrations, or he'd be doing mandala offerings constantly. And then when we went on a short visit to a nearby temple, on the way there, it was a pretty long drive. On the way there, in the car, again, the rest of us in the car were joking and laughing and so on. And this Geshe-la, the whole way there, was just reciting mantras. He was listening, he was observant, he was aware of what was going on around him. And there were a couple of times he chuckled, but this Geshe-la spent the whole time just reciting mantras. And so I saw for myself, I observed for myself, how when you recite mantras, you're unable to use your speech for anything else, all right? So a very direct, very effective way if we're trying to counter insecurity. Aside from meditation, if insecurity is the reason that triggers us to engage in idle chatter, to talk without purpose or without intent, a very direct way of countering that is just recite mantras. All right? Self-centeredness. So if self-centeredness is the trigger for you to engage in idle chatter, how can you counter that? Train yourself to listen before you respond to somebody else. Let the other person talk. All right? And meditate on the kind of questions that we ask someone else. When someone else is engaged with us in conversation, before we open our mouths to speak, think, is my question about me or is my question about them? Ask questions about someone else, all right? Let them talk. Listening is a skill that we need to train ourselves to develop. So if self-centeredness, deep-rooted self-centeredness is the reason why we engage in idle chatter, where we are constantly turning conversations on and making about ourselves, the direct counter to that is actually to train ourselves to learn how to listen, all right? How else can we engage in reducing idle chatter? Another tool that Rinpoche shared with us was by meditating on the disbenefits of idle chatter. Why? Because we do it so automatically and we do it so mindlessly that we are oftentimes not aware of the consequence that it has. So we need to keep reminding ourselves and bringing it to the forefront of our minds, reminding ourselves why it's not beneficial for our practice to engage in idle chatter. Yes, idle chatter can be, idle chatter can be consuming content mindlessly. Yes, idle chatter can be consuming content without purpose, but when we look at the definition of idle chatter, the definition that most of us automatically think to is speech. And so idle chatter is a form of communication. When you engage in idle chatter, you're trying to or attempting to communicate something. And communication is a two-way street, right? It requires another party, it requires a recipient, it requires a listener. So think about how idle chatter can have an impact on someone else. For example, when we engage in idle chatter, when I engage in idle chatter, what habits am I encouraging in the other person? Am I encouraging the other person to engage in idle chatter too? Maybe idle chatter, maybe gossiping isn't a habit that I personally struggle with, but it could be a habit that somebody else struggles with. And so when I engage in it with them, either as a listener or as the speaker, am I encouraging that habit in somebody else? When I engage in idle chatter, what ideas does it plant in someone else? What ideas or what views am I promoting in them? To us, when we gossip with someone else, we may view it as harmless gossip. But when we engage in gossip, are we inadvertently, without being aware, furthering a view that that person may already hold about someone else? Why? Because oftentimes when we gossip, we're gossiping about another person. When we engage in idle chatter, are we encouraging someone to think badly about another person? Consider how your speech will be received by someone else. What Rinpoche often advised us to do, or often reminded us to do, was that for us, when we engage in idle chatter, we may feel that that speech is purposeless, is mindless, or, we may feel that speech is purposeless or mindless or even harmless, but we could be creating or leaving ideas in someone else's mind. All right, and then they take those ideas with them and they carry on with them after the conversation. That reminds me, something I think it was from the movie Inception, and they were talking about how planting an idea in someone's head is like the one thing that you can't, is very, very hard to get rid of once it's in their head. But yeah, to us, consider, meditate, when you want to reduce idle chatter, when you want to reduce your habit of idle chattering, it's very helpful for us to meditate on the disbenefits of engaging in idle chatter. For example, meditating on what kind of ideas we're planting in someone's head or what kind of views we're promoting. We may feel that it's harmless, but it may be creating ideas or encouraging views in someone else that are not necessarily positive or not necessarily beneficial. And in doing so, we may possibly be enabling certain attitudes in them or certain approaches in them, which may not necessarily be very positive for their spiritual practice. All right, it may actually even be damaging for their practice. One scenario of how idle chatter may possibly be damaging to someone's practice. For example, when we gossip or when we talk about what we like and what we don't like, idle chatter in this way can help to reinforce somebody's likes and dislikes, someone's preferences, someone's attractions and aversions. And so when we listen and we offer a willing ear, or we appear to be offering a willing ear, are we possibly enabling and reinforcing someone's views when we listen to them because they feel a sense of validation that they've got a willing audience? Another way that idle chatter could possibly be damaging to somebody's practice is, as I mentioned, about validation. When we engage in idle chatter, we may feel that it's harmless. We may think that it's harmless. We may think that, oh, well, I'm giving this person some comfort and so on. But we could also possibly be helping them to feel validated about a view that they have. For example, some people who seemingly casually talk negatively about their lama. All right, so sometimes in conversation, I've heard people say things like, hey, so what do you think about Rinpoche doing such and such? It sounds innocuous, it sounds benign, it sounds harmless. But what is it that the person is really doing and really trying and hoping to accomplish by asking that question in a seemingly very harmless, smiling kind of way, casual kind of way, all right? Usually when people say that, depending on their motivation, I might answer them or I might just tell them, please don't talk about Rinpoche that way. Why? Because sometimes people ask a question hoping to get a certain answer, hoping to confirm a view that they have. Sometimes people, and it's not helpful for them to develop a negative view, to develop wrong view about their teacher. So sometimes when the question is genuine, I will answer them and clear up what it is that they're asking. Sometimes when I know that they're asking that question because they're trying to get confirmation for something that they feel is not right, I'll just say, please don't talk about Rinpoche that way. And Rinpoche has given an example about that in his biography, which you can read on the blog. When Rinpoche was living in Los Angeles, a student came into the kitchen whilst Rinpoche was washing dishes. Another student came into the kitchen whilst Rinpoche was washing dishes. And this student made a passing remark about Geshe-la, Geshe Sutun Gyaltsen. And Rinpoche immediately shut that person down and told the person, don't talk about Geshe-la that way. Rinpoche said he said it very politely and very firmly, but very firmly. So Rinpoche wasn't rude, but Rinpoche was very firm and told this person very nicely that Rinpoche does not wish to listen to what this person has to say about Geshe-la, because Rinpoche knew that what that person meant by their seemingly casual question was not something positive, all right? So when we go back and forth with someone in conversation, are we enabling their behavior? Are we enabling their thought? Are we enabling their speech? Do we have to sit there and listen to it and to take it in? Remember what I said about idle chatter being communication, communication being a two-way street. So you could also be the recipient of idle chatter, and so do you need to be there in order to enable, in order to validate or to reinforce someone else's view. All right. So that is one of the disbenefits of idle chatter that we can meditate on in order for us to generate a feeling that idle chatter does not have benefits and therefore I should reduce it, which is what attitudes are we enabling somebody else? What habits are we reinforcing in someone else? What views are we reinforcing in someone else? All right, and how is it damaging to their practice? How is it a distraction for our own practice as well? Hi, morning, James. Thank you for joining us this weekend. Yes, Yeah, so idle chatter has the potential to sow seeds of doubt in other people, whether it is that we are as a listener or whether it is that we are a participant, basically as a participant in idle chatter. All right, so something that appears to be very casual a conversation could actually sow seeds of doubt in someone else or reinforce it in somebody else. All right, so meditate on how it's damaging for our practice as well as how it's a distraction for our practice. Some people will go to a Dharma center just to gossip and just to talk and just to chit chat and basically just to treat it as a social gathering. Again, there's nothing wrong with chit chat. There is nothing wrong with a little bit of social conversation here and there. All right, but when it becomes the main reason for why we go to a Dharma center, so we go because we're lonely, we go because we're seeking validation, we go because we're looking for praise or we're looking for acknowledgement or we're looking for attention, sooner or later, we need to realize that sooner or later, if we go to the Dharma center for these reasons, sooner or later, the center will no longer be enough for us. In this day and age, yes, the social element is very important, but the social element should not become the main reason for why we go to the center. Why? Because if we go to a Dharma center looking for validation, if we go to a Dharma center because we're lonely, if we go to a Dharma center because we are looking for praise or acknowledgement, that is not what Dharma is for. And that is not what the center is for. That's not the center's ultimate purpose or ultimate reason for existing. Because Dharma isn't there to provide a cocoon against loneliness for us. Dharma isn't there to provide us with validation. Dharma isn't there to provide us with praise. It's not there to provide us with acknowledgement or to provide us with attention. Dharma is actually there to teach us how to be okay with ourselves and how to be okay with who we are. And if we're not going to go to a Dharma center to practice, and we're not going to go to Dharma center to learn, and then to learn which we then put into practice, we won't find what it is that we're looking for, because the root issue or the root cause for our loneliness and for our need to be validated and so on has not been addressed. Dharma and implementing or putting into practice Dharma addresses these qualities or these experiences that we may be having, these emotions that we may be having. But if we go to Dharma center because we view it as a social activity versus viewing it as a place or as a space that's safe for us to actually practice what it is that we're learning, then sooner or later Dharma won't be enough for us because we didn't put what we learned into practice, and so we didn't address the qualities and experiences that we're having. All right, so people go to a center looking for a way out of their suffering. They go to a center because they're looking for a way to be less unhappy. They go to a center because they're looking for a way to be less discontent, or looking for a way to be less dissatisfied, or looking for a way to be less insecure, and so on. Some people, when they go, they practice and they move forwards and they progress. Other people, they don't. They go to the center because they view the center as a place where they have their gang of friends and, you know, they can get together and drink tea, spill the tea. They go to a Dharma center for the social aspect. Now, just think about it this way. If we are the type of person who goes to center for the social aspect, purely for the social aspect, I'm saying, but in our group of friends, there are people who actually do practice and actually do move forwards and actually do progress. Sooner or later, those who go because of the social aspect will look around and they'll find that all of their friends are doing better, all of their friends are doing more, all of their friends are progressing, getting more involved, doing deeper practices, doing more practice, spending more time doing practices. And so you're back to square one, because your gang, the people that you surrounded yourself with, are no longer there around you because they've moved on to other things. And so eventually that is how a center can no longer be enough for us, because in terms of fulfilling our loneliness, in terms of fulfilling our insecurity, because we didn't put into practice what it is that we learned from the center. All right. Sadly, sometimes you can see that this is one of the reasons why people leave, because they find that everyone around them that they came in with has moved so far forwards, they feel left behind. Because they may not necessarily put in the same amount of practice or effort or time into their practice as those that are around them. And so they leave because they think that there's nothing around for them to stay for. All right? So, idle chatter in this way can also lead to becoming a distraction for our practice. Us going to the Dharma Center as a social reason, as a social gathering, a social occasion, being one of the examples. All right. Very quickly, when we're talking about meditating on the disbenefits of idle chatter, we also need to consider our own sense of responsibility towards other people's practice. So, what ideas are we reinforcing in someone else which are unhelpful, and what attitudes are we enabling when we are a participant in idle chatter? And by meditating on this, it can help us to generate a sense of aversion to engaging in such an action. You, as someone watching this live stream, you as someone watching this video, I can safely assume you are someone who's looking to engage in spiritual practice. You're someone who is spiritual, someone who does care about other people, someone who has a sense of responsibility for someone else, and a sense of responsibility for someone else's welfare and someone else's spiritual well-being. All right? So, meditate on that sense of responsibility as someone who's spiritual, and think that I wish to foster and I wish to encourage spiritual thinking and spiritual behavior in the minds of others. You don't need to be a pastor, you don't need to be a monk, you don't need to be a nun, you don't need to be a Dharma teacher to do any of this. All right? As a Dharma brother or sister to somebody else, is my action, is my activity, is my behavior encouraging and fostering spiritual thinking in the minds of someone else? Therefore, if I engage in this conversation, will it be beneficial to the other person? Will it be beneficial to myself? Will it be beneficial to their practice, to our practice? When you meditate on that, and when you make yourself very, very aware of that, it helps us to generate that feeling of aversion towards idle chatter, because then we can see how a situation may not necessarily be helpful to somebody else. When we develop that sense of responsibility for somebody else's spiritual well-being, for someone else's spiritual welfare. All right. Now, last thing before I go. The point of all of this is not to be rude. All right. So what Rinpoche said was, when we find ourselves in a situation where we may potentially fall into an idle interaction, the point is not to be rude, all right? So don't be like, well, you see, as a Buddhist, idle chatter is not good for you. I know idle chatter is not good for you, so stop talking. I don't want to hear this, all right? The point of it is not for you to go and tell someone to shut up, because idle chatter is not good for them. The point of it is to be skillful, all right? It's to generate an understanding that every action that we have, that we engage in, every word that we utter, no matter how harmless or benign it appears to be, all of these actions generate a reaction, and all of these actions generate a result and generate a consequence. And while the consequence may not be experienced by us immediately, it can have an impact on someone else. All right, so when you meditate on the disbenefits of idle chatter in order to generate an aversion towards it, the point of it is not for us to go, well, I've meditated on this and I know it's a waste of time, so I'm going to end this conversation now because I don't want to hear about it. Right? Be skillful. You can talk for a little while, maybe, guide the conversation along, and then turn it into something else. Pivot. Learn how to pivot. All right? I think that's everyone's favorite word right now, pivoting. Keep meditating on why it's not beneficial for us to engage in idle chatter, and why it is that we need to cut down on it and we need to reduce it. Why do we need to keep meditating on it? We need to constantly keep meditating on it because we are constantly slipping. All right, so we constantly need to remind ourselves of the disbenefits and of the reasons why it's not beneficial for us to engage in idle chatter. It's an automatic habit. It's something that all of us do without thinking, and being that it's so automatic and so deeply ingrained in us, we do need to spend time on trying to undo this habit. Hello, good morning, Ali. We need to do something that will constantly make us aware of it so that we can stop it as soon as it arises. Now, finally, the last tool that I want to share with you guys before I wrap this up for today, the last tool that I want to share with you guys that is something Rinpoche often recommended, especially for those of us who find that we may be quite careless with our speech, or quite loose with our speech, or quite generous with our speech, is Rinpoche oftentimes recommended or suggested for us to do silent retreats. All right, the parameters that Rinpoche would set whilst someone was engaging in silent retreat was that that person should not talk about anything else other than work. When I say talk, I don't mean just verbally, but people engaged in silent retreat, Rinpoche would suggest that they should not even type or text anything that's not about work. And if somebody asks a question to you, if someone asks a question to you and you need to reply, try to keep it to a minimum, only to yes or no, or even write it down. All right, and people who are in silent retreat would often wear tags to let other people know that I'm in silent retreat. So please help me with my practice, and don't talk to me. All right, it's not a punishment. It's not a punishment. It's a practice for us to train to become mindful of our speech. Because when we're in silent retreat and we are very mindful all the time of what it is that we should or should not be saying, because, oh, this isn't about work, so I'm not going to talk about it. Oh, this isn't about Dharma, so I'm not going to open my mouth. It gives us an opportunity to develop this new kind of habit, because and then you also become very, very aware and very mindful of the fact that most of our speech has no purpose, has no meaning, is usually frivolous. All right, and we also become aware of just how automatic it is. And you will find that the first few days of being in silent retreat are very challenging. Why? Because as soon as somebody asks us a question, our automatic reaction is to open our mouth and answer it. But when you're in silent retreat, you have the tag around your neck. You realize, oh, hang on, I'm in silent retreat. Do I really need to be answering this question this way? Is this question or is this conversation really with purpose, really with intent, really going to be harmless? All right, so being in silent retreat, and why Rinpoche would often encourage some people to be in silent retreat, was it trains us to be mindful of our speech, and it trains us to be very aware of how automatically we would like to respond, how automatically we verbalize and utter things, what kind of situations or what kind of examples of people who Rinpoche would suggest to be in silent retreat. For example, some people have very negative speech without even realizing it. Observe, right? You guys maybe once I mention it, you may become aware of this. There are some people, no matter how positive their speech ends up being, they will always start their sentence with no. So even if you ask them a question like, have you arranged the flowers in the vase for offerings? No, but I have. Okay, when they've actually done it. Or do you like egg and cheese sandwiches? No, the other day I had. Okay, so there's some people whose speech always starts with the word no. I don't know why. And once I mention this, you might actually find that you become very, very aware of people who are like that. But there are some people who start their speech like that. And so for those people, Rinpoche did recommend to them before that they should do silent retreat. And after they engaged in silent retreat for like weeks, they actually stopped saying no. Starting every sentence with a no. They actually stopped engaging in just endless, mindless chatter. All right? It's very difficult first. We will find that the urge to talk is very, very strong. and we become aware of just how automatic it is that we react with our speech. But I've seen for myself the benefits of engaging in silent retreat. That is something that we can practice wherever we are. We don't necessarily have to be in a Dharma center in order to practice it. I would strongly suggest being very skillful in doing it. So please don't please don't wear a tag that says I'm in silent retreat and then go to work, and then when your boss asks you a question, hold up the tag and then tell your boss that you're in silent retreat. Okay, no, not like that. All right. On weekends, when you have some spare time, when you're at home, for example, when you're in an environment, when you're with your family who understand what it is that you're trying to do, after you've explained it to them, you can do it then. You don't have to be around other people. That's the other part I want to raise. You don't have to be around other people in order to engage in a silent retreat. You can, if you live at home alone, you can still engage in a silent retreat. All right. Setting aside time to make yourself aware, to generate the kind of awareness of how automatically it is we engage in speech that is without purpose, that lacks intent, that does not further our pursuit of the goal of enlightenment. All right. So, okay. Question from James: how long should we practice silent retreat? What was typical for Rinpoche to recommend, at least for lay practitioners? So, in answer to your question, James, it really, what Rinpoche recommended for different people really depended on the individual person. So on the, for lack of a better word, on the severity of their problem, the depth of their problem. For some people whose speech is very harmful. So for example, some people have speech that they're constantly, in some way, constantly asking for something. They've got speech that is constantly trying to get something from someone else. And if that habit's very, very deeply ingrained, Rinpoche would recommend it in some cases for months. For some people whose habits are not so deeply ingrained, weeks maybe. For others, for those of us who are interested in practicing it on our own as lay practitioners, just to give ourselves the experience of generating that kind of mindfulness of our speech, can do it over the weekend. For example, we do it when we're doing short retreats in our Dharma center. So when we do like 2-3 day retreats, for example, we have a program here called the Inner Peace Retreat. And during this retreat, at the beginning of the retreat, people's cell phones, people's mobile phones, handphones are taken from them, labeled, kept away, nice and safely. So that removes one avenue through which we can engage in idle chatter. Then during the duration of the retreat, we are encouraged not to talk if it is not something that has purpose. All right, so that program lasts for 2 days. For the longer ones, it lasts for 3 days. For those of us who are engaged in deity retreats, for the duration of the retreat, however long that retreat is going to be, we try as much to engage in silent retreat. So in our breaks, we don't talk to other people if it's not about work. If we don't scroll through our phones, go on social media, we spend our time reading Dharma books or even doing other practice. So in between retreat sessions, doing mandala offerings, doing recitation of other mantras and so on. So the duration of a silent retreat, should you wish to do one, is really dependent on the person and really dependent on the situation you find yourself in. If the severity or the depth of the habit that we have is very, very deep and very deeply ingrained, then it's something that we can carry on for a longer period of time. If it's not practical for us to do so, set ourselves a duration. For the next 24 hours, I will engage in silent retreat. And then do it consistently. So the key for lay practitioners, the key for us who may not be in a situation where it's so practical for us to be in silent retreat for long durations of time, is doing it consistently over a period of time. All right, so be practical with it. Okay. Yeah, so there was no typical length that Rinpoche would recommend. It was really dependent on the person that Rinpoche was addressing or guiding or helping at the time. Okay, the longest silent retreat I know that Rinpoche has advised someone to be in, I think lasted for a year. The person was in silent retreat for a year. After they came out of silent retreat, they were very... The thing about idle chatter that we don't realize is that we have this constant noise in our minds, our monkey minds, and it's constantly going. And when we don't have an opportunity to verbalize it all the time, because we're in silent retreat, we find that our minds calm down dramatically. And so this person, after they came out of silent retreat for a year, they were in silent retreat for a year, when they came out, they were quite different in the sense that their minds had calmed down quite a lot, right? And many of the habits that they had exhibited previously cut down, reduced dramatically, all right? So I've seen for myself, we may think, oh, a year of not talking about anything except for work, my God, it sounds so harsh. Why would, someone go through that? But there are benefits that I have observed for myself, all right? So that is it from me for today. If you guys do have any questions after this stream has ended, please feel free to leave me a comment in the bottom of this video, bottom, top, depending on where you are. And I'll get back to you as soon as I can, maybe in the next video, or I'll just reply directly to you, all right? Before I go, just want to remind you guys, or leave you guys with this message. Reflect on the past week, because we are now entering week 4 of our CMCO. So for those of us who are now back to working from home, not able to go to the office, reflect on how we felt and how we have reacted to that situation, how we have navigated that situation. Have we, being that we are, working from home or not allowed to go around, run here and there and seek entertainment here and there, how have we used our time? Have we used our time and tried to fill it up mindlessly consuming content? Have we used our time trying to find entertainment all over the place by, trying to have constant conversations with people via text, making Zoom calls, social Zoom calls, and so on? How have we engaged, reinforced our habit of engaging in idle chatter over the last week? And then as you move into this week, this is an opportunity for us to practice a little bit of mindfulness and to generate a bit of awareness for our habits. So when we feel these, when we observe these triggers for our idle chatter coming up, feelings of mental agitation, of insecurity, feeling like, oh, I'm at home, will my wife be upset with me that I haven't spoken to her in an hour or 2 hours and I need to go and have a conversation with her? As we're doing that, as we move into this week, be mindful of the triggers for idle chatter and do our best to try and reduce it. If you're working from home and you don't have an obligation to, take multiple Zoom calls and multiple Zoom meetings in between, try a silent retreat for the next 3 hours, for the next 4 hours, for the next 5 hours. If it's not about Dharma, if it's not about something spiritually beneficial, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to chase it. I'm not going to pursue it. If you can't do 5 hours, do 4 hours. If you can't do 4 hours, do 3 hours. If you can't do that, do half an hour. Do your first half an hour. See how it goes. And then after you finish your first half an hour, think, okay, I've done half an hour. Let me do the next half an hour. And before you know it, your half an hour's built up until it becomes an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and so on, all right? So take it easy, take it step by step as we move into this week, all right? Before I go, some quick reminders. Tonight, Doji Shukden Sadhana on the Chinese Kechara Facebook fan page at 10 p.m. Tuesday, 9:30 p.m, Easy Dharma for the New Normal with Pastor David. And then on Thursday at 8 p.m. on the Kecharans and Friends Facebook group, there is the Sam Rinpoche Swift Return Puja, all right, which is being live streamed. And if you guys haven't already done so, please do sign up for the Sam Rinpoche Relic Stupa news group. I've been posting updates there about our retreat. And so you guys can go and have a look, all right? Thank you so much for joining me today. So sorry I had to cancel you guys last week. But thank you very much for joining me today. And if you have any requests for specific topics, any questions, if you have any requests for prayers or offerings to be made, leave me a comment at the end of this video. All right. Don't forget to do your dedications wherever you are. I will do mine once this feed is over. And once again, thank you so much to the 3 sponsors of today's sharing, Anonymous, Linny, and Stacey Isidro. Your contribution and your continued contributions do help us to continue to make these sharings available for everyone. All right, so thank you guys so much. I'll see you same time, same place next week. Fingers crossed, Sirkim to Dorishukten, no more food poisoning. All right, I'll see you guys same time, same place next week. And have a lovely week, guys, and bye.